welcome back to NeuroDiverse Christian Couples. I'm Stephanie.
Dan.
And you have asked and we have listened. You wanted to hear from a neurodiverse Christian couple where the husband is neurotypical and the wife is neurodiverse. So I'm excited to introduce you today or have them introduce themselves. Molly and Gary coming to us from the West Coast. So will you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. My name is Gary Chupik from Seattle, Washington.
And I'm Molly from Seattle, too.
Well, I heard y'all on another podcast, and after hearing your story and kind of hearing how you presented that, I was like, well, we need to bring that to our listeners. And since this is coming out later in the year, you might be thinking, is this the same Molly I've heard before on Just the Girls? And yes, we earlier this year would have done Just the Girls, and Molly was one of our women who participated. So thank you again for doing that, Molly. So we'll jump right in.
Well, I guess the first question ought to be, how did we get here? So what is y'all's story? Start back as far as seems relevant, but give us the, maybe the elevator pitch, and we'll dive into details after that.
I feel like from the very beginning, there's always like a little bit of a difference that both of us recognize, probably more Gary than me. But I would say around 2008 or 9, when we were beginning our church planting journey, that's when some of those differences that seemed more different in me really started to come out. And that's when I feel like both of us were sort of pursuing like, what is this? And we had gone through a few different church planting assessments and just had the, just the opportunity to dive down a little bit more into that. And that's where I ended up just doing an online quiz that they have out there, like for autism, Asperger, and took this one quiz. And I think I got like 11 out of 13 questions is yes. And I was like, Gary, what do you think about this? And so we just began down that journey. So really more all self-diagnosed for me, and Gary readily affirming that.
Yeah. So what's that like for you then, Gary, kind of seeing that? Because we have this extra layer that y'all are in ministry, and then church planting is a whole other beast in ministry when you're trying to build something from the ground up, and then now finding out this kind of difference in marriage. What was that like for you?
Well, it's interesting. When we were first married, you don't really suspect anything. You just think, oh, this person's really different, or, oh, this is really cute, or I really like this about them. And then you realize, wait a minute, that's not just, them putting on their best behavior. They really are this way. For example, one of the things that I loved about Molly was that she was so completely focused on me and what I was going through, and listening really well, and so I thought, well, that's really great. I could really trust her. And then I realized that she really struggled with making friends, but at that time I thought, well, she's just really into me. And so you misdiagnose in some ways the characteristics and the attributes of the other person. And so the honeymoon wore off eventually, and you say, oh, that this is the way that this person really is. And you begin to understand the ramifications of that and the implications for different areas of your life. And so I knew something up front was just maybe a little bit different or a little bit quirky. And then as the marriage goes on, and as the intensity of ministry kind of turns up, you have less resources to be able to, maybe handle things and play the long game in relationships. When you're church planting and ministry, there's so much of the tyranny of the urgent, and Molly's not an urgent person. Mm-hmm. And so I needed her to be urgent. And so there was a lot of clash that would take place. And so it's just been chipping away at this image of everything is fine, everything is okay, but then you chip away at it enough to find out at the core, this person really is very different, and we see things very, very differently, more so than in a typical relationship, but it just was unique in our relationship.
So back up the timeline then. So if that was 2008, 2009, when you did self-assessment, how long had you been married at that point?
At that point, almost 20 years. Yeah, about 20 years.
Yeah, we had gone a long ways into this journey, and we just didn't ever think that it was a formal diagnosis. So we were just sort of coping with each other's differences for quite some time until, like I said, things kind of, the heat gets turned up a little bit, and you kind of go, okay, what is going on in this relationship that we're not presently aware of? What other factors are at play? I call them undercurrents. Like, what are the undercurrents that are beneath the surface that we just have not really paid much attention to?
So, a lot of couples over these past couple of years, it was COVID and being under the same roof that kind of showed what the differences are. Did the church planting ministry part, was that one of the things that kind of magnified the difference? Or what was kind of the tipping point of our differences feel a little bigger than ordinary male female differences in marriage?
Well, we actually had closed our church plant in 2016. So we were not church planting or pastoring during COVID. And but I definitely feel like because there was a lot more free time and Gary had recently started his own business, February of 2019. So it was very intense for him because nobody's really doing much of anything, right? And you're trying to grow a business. So things were quieter, and I think things were quieter between us, and we're all just trying to get by, basically.
Yeah, and I think the intensity of our life just sort of went up another notch. And so you just don't have the patience or the resources or the spoons to be able to deal with a lot of things. And so you want to deal with things quicker and move on from things. But Molly, I think the way that she learns and the way that she handles conflict and the way that she handles new situations, that began to wear on me in a way that I hadn't suspected before. And that was some of the turmoil that was just going on in my life. And everything just sort of, a lot of things came to a head. And then I had this incredible realization, and I don't mean incredible in a great way, but I had this realization. Well, maybe it was useful though, was that I don't think Molly's changing. And I'm really trying to adapt so much to this relationship, and it just doesn't feel like she's changing much. And so I'm staring in the face that things may never be different. Things may never change. She may never, be the person that I wish for her to be, instead of just accepting her for who she is. And I thought, well, maybe if I was super husband forever, that maybe that would change, some of the traits in her. And that didn't work either. And so I sort of came to this realization that things were just not going to be different. And that was very, very sobering to me.
And I feel like when you talk about COVID enabled that to happen because that was a time that Gary just had to slow down. Because Gary is definitely, extrovert, busy, produce, let's get it done. And COVID, you had to slow down. And so he had a lot more time to think and process and go, wait a minute, my wife's not really reacting to me during this time the way that I think that she should. So I feel like in some ways, I've never really thought about it. It was actually probably a catalyst and a blessing in our relationship that Gary was able to slow down enough and to really say, hey, I know I've never been fully happy here, but wow, now the way she's treating me during COVID, something's not right here.
Okay. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So you mentioned that you had to accept her for how she is, not how you wanted. Tell me, that's an extremely interesting thought, thinking, work through mentally. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one because it peeled back the layers of my own selfishness and what I really wanted to have in my relationship and what I wanted to experience. And I have this thing in my business called whole life excellence. And I want to be excellent at everything. I want all of my relationships to be excellent. I want all of my work to be excellent. I want to be excellent. I want to be in excellent health. And I'm not you hear over time, a lot of churches, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of business say that excellence is one of their values. That's never been a value for me in terms of like my business or in just in ministry. But in me personally, I've always pursued excellence. I want to be an excellent husband. I want to be an excellent father. And so I think coming to the conclusion that I was had expectations of Molly that she could never meet and in my view, in some ways having to redefine what excellent was. And that was just a sobering thing. Like I had to repent of wanting my wife to be someone different than she is. And when I talk about repentance, that really is true. It was almost like I was chasing after a vision or a version of her that she could never achieve. And so the issue was, I mean, we kind of play back and forth. And one of the things that maybe your listeners aren't aware of is that I had reached out to Stephanie, where Molly and I had reached out to Stephanie and say, we need help, in our marriage relationship, because whatever it is that we're doing is not working. And to be able to come face to face with the fact that we're failing, or I'm failing in this relate, and I don't know what to do about it. And so I kind of hit the wall and I said, I need to get help. And we've talked about getting help in the past, but a lot of it was just the realization that I'm trying to change her, and I need to let go of my expectations of the relationship the way I would want it. So that was really sobering, Dan.
And I'd like to add into that for my part, I think I've always known this, but it faced me that I had to be okay with, quote unquote, like not being what Gary really hopes that I would be. And that is actually a very, very difficult thing to do when you love a person and you know they want something from you and you just can't give it. It's really difficult. So there's a vulnerability on my part to just, it's not like I had to change or I have to live out the rest of my relationship thinking I'm not good enough for my husband, but I do have to believe him when he's done his work. I have to believe him and receive that I've done some shifting, and Molly, just right where you're at. I love you. I accept you. We're going to move forward in this. And that takes vulnerability and work on my part to do that.
What's the crescendo for that then? So now you've both accepted a new definition or a new expectation, not recognizing one as good or bad, but recognizing one as different. What became of that? If you're looking at the how you interacted, your relationship, the regular I don't like to use the word connection, it's so ambiguous, but that level of relational intimacy, maybe that's a good way to put it. What did that do to change that?
Well, I can speak for myself, which is intimacy is an interesting word, because there's a lot of layers to intimacy. There's different kinds of intimacy. There's different layers to it. But I think the one that made the difference for me personally was vulnerability, because in some ways, I'll never forget it. Like, I remember Stephanie and I were having a one-on-one, and I remember probably about halfway through our counseling sessions, and I remember saying to Stephanie, what do you want to tell me that you just have been thinking for a while, but you just haven't said it for whatever reason? I'm not judging you on the reason, just you haven't told me. And so I just want to give you just a complete blank slate, and you can say anything that you want. What do you think I need to hear? And Stephanie responded by saying, quit trying to protect Molly. Do you remember that, Stephanie? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of, after a while, like somebody that, I'm the neurotypical, I think I know the answers. I think I know the direction. I think I know the way that we should go. So there's always that thinking I know what needs to be done or how something needs to be done. And I remember thinking, oh, well, Molly is not capable. There's things that she's not capable of. And I've tried to change that, or I've tried to empower her or help her, and it wasn't changing. And so I switched somehow in the late, 2000, I don't know, it must've been 2017, 18, 19, where I was just like, she's not capable. She's not capable of meeting my needs. She's not capable of the intimacy that I long for, especially emotionally. And so I kind of just went into like, she's not capable. And in that, I became, I think, protective of her, and lowered my expectation for intimacy in our relationship. So I was like, well, she's just not capable. And if she's not capable, then I think I came to the realization that nothing's really going to change, and that I just need to try to, quote unquote, protect her or protect my own vulnerability. And so I thought, she's not capable. And so I remember Stephanie saying, quit trying to protect Molly. And I said, so you think I need to like just blurt out my feelings and hurt her if I need to? And she said, that's exactly what I need you to do. And I remember, like,
in a nice way.
Yeah, in a nice way. And I was like, well, here we go. Because if this doesn't work, or if this is causes more harm than good, then we are done in our relationship. Because feels like, unfortunately for Stephanie, she experiences a lot of couples who are at the 11th hour of their marriage if something doesn't change. And so I thought, well, here we go. We're going to take this big risk to be vulnerable, and I might have to hurt Molly's feelings saying all this stuff. But you know what? I don't have any other keys on my keychain to make this work. And so here we go. And then I began to become more vulnerable. And so for me, intimacy is a lot of vulnerability, because I don't know how anyone heals without being vulnerable. And that vulnerability is so crucial. And yeah, it might hurt the other person, but if we make the decision for them and they don't ever have a chance to respond, and this is what Stephanie's word for me was, you're never giving Molly a chance to respond to your pain. And because you wanted to protect her from the pain. So that was super valuable to me, and kind of redefining intimacy in terms of vulnerability was really helpful.
So I want to recap a bunch of things, points that I heard. And so first of all, some of the changing points that from this podcast is I have to keep like counselor brain out and focus on what we've said right here in this conversation.
Right.
But you talked about not lowering expectations, but changing expectations. That's a super important mindset shift. If I think someone isn't capable and I'm just lowering my needs and standards, I'm not going to feel good about that. And I've, like I said, labeled somebody else and I haven't given them the chance. You talked about it's okay to want to be excellent, but then also accepting each other for who you are, and then figuring out a different way to bring connection or intimacy kind of based on who we are and the resources we have. We have to figure out that's the problem to solve instead of trying to change the other person. Would that be kind of accurate as some of the main points that I've heard so far?
Yeah, I think so. Like that redefinition is important of what excellent is, what intimacy is. And then because if you aren't open to redefining things, then you're closed and you're not going to go anywhere. And yeah, I mean, at times, I shouldn't say at times, a lot of the time it feels like we're moving so slow. We're talking so much, but we're moving so slow in these directions. And part of the issue is, if I expect her to think neurotypically, then we would be on the same page or be closer to being on the same page. But because I simply do not understand a lot of the way that she thinks, it doesn't mean that I can't attempt to or try to understand more or give the time and effort to do that. Yeah, it just, there's a lot of redefinition that needed to take place.
So for you, Molly, like back in that stage of like, you're just not capable, what does it feel like, for someone to say like, you're not capable and you're never going to change? So from your perspective, so that maybe other neurotypical spouses, like when we label, like, you're just not capable and you're just not going to do it, and I'm just not ever going to believe that could change. What does that do for you? Or what would you like to kind of talk through about that?
Sure. Well, I think I know that I'm really blessed that even Gary is answering his question truthfully, but Gary truly he's a good person. He has a good heart. He is kind. And even if he's going to be brutally honest with me, his intentions for me are good. And I've always been aware of that. And that's been really helpful for me. And I'm losing my train of thought. Help me.
So it's important, not kind of take you back. So it is important, first of all, to believe the other person's for your good. That helps us kind of hear the feedback. But when he kind of had to give you the brutally honest feedback that, I've been telling myself that you're not capable, or I've been trying to change you. And what's kind of your processing about that when kind of hearing that from somebody?
Thank you. Yeah, because I feel like not feeling like I'm capable has been something that's been there my whole life. And it just got bigger and bigger when when I became married to Gary and the longer we're together, because he is so capable. And there was this undercurrent or this baseline in my own life where I just knew I could never be what he wanted me to be. I couldn't ever measure up. We couldn't be even or equal. And it's just kind of the way it was going to be. And what what I feel is really interesting when we started meeting with you, Stephanie, or even talking just more in depth about this part of our relationship, I always thought it was mostly about me. I'm the problem. I'm the different one. I'm the one that's causing grief and heartache and Gary. And the longer we went on our journey, the more I realized it's not that Gary was the problem. It's just that this journey has been so much more about him, because he's the one that's been dissatisfied, frustrated, feeling, unloved, or like he's not seen, or just the intimacy or emotional closeness isn't there. I didn't feel those things. I didn't experience those things. And I'm not quite sure where to land with that. One of the places I want to land is the fact that even though Gary is in pain and he's struggling, he's still loving his wife very well, which the benefit of that for him is that I'm still willing to work with him, because he's not wounding me. He's not hurting me. He's like, what is wrong with you? Like that. He's not doing that. He's openly sharing his frustrations, but he's doing it in a way that I can receive it and still come close to him. And so for me, it is a lot of just being vulnerable and just having to say, yeah, I'm not like that. I'll never be able to do that. And I wish I could. If I could be that for you and give that to you, I would love to. And I have to choose to not live in shame or guilt or shut down or pull away from him. I have to choose to trust him. And like when he talks about the whole protection thing and you telling him like, stop doing it, you know, and I can appreciate that. But there's an overarching element of who Gary is that he's still always, that's going to be a default for him. In his heart, he's always going to want to protect me. And when you kind of dig down in the deep parts of that, I'm so grateful for that. He's not trying to pick at me and yeah, just like be upset with me about something or who I am. I just know that that undercurrent is there.
You've been processing something?
Yeah, so I want to go back to there was I think we should say this almost as many times as we have the opportunity. That statement that you said, I know he's for me. And Gary, was that reciprocal?
Did you feel like even with the differences that Molly's still for you?
And you better answer truthfully.
The truth meter is sitting right beside you.
Exactly. Well, it's a really insightful question, Dan, because I remember during COVID and I had hit the wall and I didn't know what to do. And so I remember sitting in my chair downstairs at our house and just saying, you know what, I just need to be quiet. And I think I was quiet for a few months, I would say, kind of resentful, angry, hurt. And Molly's way of dealing with issues is to isolate and draw back. And I was like, well, that's the worst thing that you can do is right now for me would be to draw back. Right. And so I experienced her drawing back is even more rejection. And so every now and again, she would be like, is everything okay? You know, like what? And then she figured things were not okay. And then she figured out that things were about her. And then, but it just wasn't enough. And I was like, do you not care about our relationship enough to fight for it? Like, even if you didn't know what to do, and Dan, this is where I think I got really hurt. Even if you didn't know what to do, wouldn't you just like go to that other person and beg them to like tell you? And I think she did in her own way. I think I just wanted it to look a certain way. Will you fight for this? Like, what is you are literally going upstairs to your room and just isolating. Like, is that, and even though, and she didn't know what to do. So I understand that a lot of it was based on that. And maybe you can correct me.
No,
but it just, I was experiencing that separation as this proves my point. This is never going to change. I am always, even in the worst moments of my life, she is going to retract and not reach out. And so I thought, oh, okay. So this is how it's going to be. And that's when I think I called Stephanie and said, I mean, we had looked into other counselors and that kind of thing, but none of them were met my standard. And so meeting Stephanie was just like, oh, okay, here's someone that I think, so let's explore this, and had a few month waiting list or whatever. But that was just really because I had hit the wall. So yeah, that's a good question, Dan. And how it's almost like there's two operating systems going on. The hardware, they're both computers, right? We have a Mac and a PC or a Windows based, and the hardware is the same. In most cases, they both have a hard drive and a CPU, but the software has to be, they're different. It's different. It's a different operating system. And I needed to get myself out of the Windows operating system when it came to Molly, and then figure out there's a program called Boot Camp where you can have a Mac and a Windows based operating system on your laptop. And I was like, I have to switch out because I'm interpreting the world through my Windows software and Molly's on a Mac. And I'm just like, I got to figure out ways not to be offended by things.